What's up everybody, it's Metamither. Today I'm bringing you a different kind of video. I'm super psyched that I was able to help out shooting an event featuring the senior industrial designer from Moog, Petoniak. This was part of a bigger event that was a collaboration between New York City DJ and producer platform No Signal and the New York label Impulse Control. I'll put links to both in the description so you can check them out, and be sure to support what they're doing by following their channels. Alright, without any further ado, here's Petoniak of Moog.
Stephen, I wanted to have a conversation with you primarily because you are coming from such a specific background design. Moog is a let's just call it a legendary brand. Been very influential for many years. And real quick, I just want to ask you, what are some things that you think about when you think about design, just in general? So just to kind of put some words onto the table. What do you think about when you think about design?
I think about people first. People have said it, can be what separates art and design is sometimes art can be for other people, but design is almost always for people, right? As I think about musical instruments, as I think about designing for Moog, we're thinking about artists, simplicity, that's kind of the easy cop-out answer on any design.
Okay, so first off, I want to give you a chance to just share a little bit about your, your story in the sense of the things that you make and how you arrive at those ideas. So you have a little presentation for us, all right? So why don't you take us through it?
Thanks. Yeah, hi everybody. Once again, I'm Petoniak. I'm an industrial designer based in Asheville, North Carolina. Yeah, so I work for Moog Music. I'm responsible for designing Moog's products. So I work with our hardware engineers, closely with artists that we have long-standing relationships with. And I do the panel layouts, help decide feature sets, and implement UX workflows, stuff like that. And bring everything all the way through to production. Work with the manufacturers and make the products real. So I've done a lot of modular synthesizers for Moog in the last couple of years. I've been working there for 7 years. So Mavis was one that we did not too long ago that I was really happy with. Subharmonicon, some of you may know. Actually, the first thing I touched when I got to Moog, so I was really, really thrilled about that one. Spectravox. Done a couple theremins for my theremin heads in the house.
Where are my theremin heads at?
Yeah.
Anyone? Any theremin? No. We got one?
But also software and accessories, bags, things, hard cases, things for musicians who are trying to get to the gig, right? Software has been an interesting place to kind of get into in the last couple of years, because we are a hardware company, right? But we invested, time and patience into kind of trying to translate that hardware experience into the software realm with things like Mariana and the Mooger Fogger FX pedals, which they're quite novel actually with their approach to modulation in that you can run virtual CV from one of them to the other, right? That's more like a bitwig type thing, but from plugins, it's kind of clever. But having the experience of designing both hardware and software, from my perspective, I use everything, right? I work in the box. I'm most successful at finishing tracks in Ableton, right? But I make a lot of the things that are my starting points, my inspiration points in hardware, right? And so it's kind of bouncing back and forth, different mediums. These tools I think are very important for artists because you want to be inspired by your tools. You don't want these things to be boring. You don't want them to be drab or bullish. In the States, so much of this hardware is replicatable in software too. So that's not even necessarily an easy out, right? Where you can say, it sounds better. And sometimes you make it sound worse. So I think more of it on an emotional side, right? Where I like to physically touch things. Instead of staring at my computer all day, I want to stare at a smaller, different computer. But hardware does have a few distinct advantages over software for the things that I think about, and that's a dedicated physical workflow that inspires you to explore sound in that physical way, which software might not have unless you want to spend time MIDI mapping and labeling all your CCs, which you can do. And that like muscle memory you might get to create through playing an instrument, right? You know where these things are. They're there all the time, and you can perform on them in the same way that other more acoustic instruments are performed on. And then really like the reliability, and it's funny because sometimes it's reliable and sometimes it's not. But I think in general, certainly if you're more like a band musician, right, like you don't want to rely on a laptop at your show, right? You want something that makes sound on its own. You want it to be reliable to just set up and play. So those are the big things on hardware for me. I'm just going to talk a little briefly about some principles I think about when I'm designing our hardware. I think about the hierarchy of the instrument, so like a logical ordering of any elements that are included on it. I think about the ergonomics. That was my rule of thumb joke before. Just making sure everything feels good, everything's spaced neatly. I think about legibility, and that is like, how readable is the text from the player's perspective when you're playing live, in a dark room. Also, like, how understandable is the interface, right? If you've created this arcane thing, that can be good and fine. It's not really Moog's ethos particularly, right? Like, we're in a more utilitarian thing versus like a make noise thing, which leans into the like arcaneness of it, which I love all the make noise stuff. But it's like two different sides of legibility, right? And then quality. We have like I guess it was our mission statement. It's musical instruments designed to inspire creativity for a lifetime. And I think we all take that really seriously at Moog. And it doesn't just mean like, oh, it needs to sound good. Like it comes down to component sourcing where, we want to make sure that, we're going to pick components that aren't going to need to be replaced every 5 years. Like I want to make stuff that, just like the old Model Ds, like, they need some work too, but just like an old Model D in 60 years, people can still turn that thing on and work on it. And if something does go wrong also, like just making sure it's serviceable in design, I think that's part of quality. And so like these things are repairable, because, they're they have digital brains, but they're not that complicated. If you get a schematic, right? Cost, we don't want things to be too expensive. We also don't want things to be too cheap, right? There's balance to strike, but if you're ultimately, it's a commercial endeavor, Moog specifically. So we're trying to make and sell synthesizers. So we want to make sure we're offering like really good value. I think that's like how we think about a lot of our design decisions, and like what value does like adding cost or taking cost out of a design bring to the player. And then like how the musicality of it, right? Like it's like if we've put these 5 knobs on it, right? Like what musical experience does that specifically afford inputting there, right? Like that could be like things like a screen, it could be knobs, all these things, right? But it's all kind of driven based off of like how do we make sure performers have what they need when they need it. And like there's this great Bob Moog quote that you may have seen on a box. I think about it all the time. What artists need is an endless resource full of rough edges and dimly lit nooks and crannies that one can explore as one sees fit. It's awfully poetic of a very spiritual man.
It sounds like Berghain.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's like part of the joy of not understanding an instrument too, is like that process of starting with something that you don't get and coming to a better understanding of it, like that. That's been really fun for me. Yeah. So I want to talk about a couple of our instruments that I've worked on. So I'm going to start off with Muse, which is a 8-voice bitimbral polyphonic synthesizer. It takes inspiration from old Moog modulars, the large format stuff. It uses a lot of the circuits from that, and presents it into a feature set that's more focused on like keyboard players and live performance. We asked a lot of questions throughout the process of designing Moog, but a couple came back around many times through that process. What would a synthesizer look like if it was designed for immediate hands-on control, but also like full freedom of that like large format modular experience, right? And so it kind of drove us to make decisions that, put features in it that you only really see in more advanced pieces of software, but with like a dedicated physical interface and workflow. Another question was, what gets space when you can't have everything, right? Design is full of trade-offs, and notably, we wanted this thing to be a beast. We wanted to put everything in it, and so, I think this one I will say was a rather laborious design. I think I've designed this panel over 100 times. Not the most fun. I generally like it when we get it in the first 10 tries. That feels better. But we ended up in a nice place. But when you can't put all the ideas, all your brilliant ideas, all the brilliant hardware engineer ideas onto the front panel, you got to make decisions. And so we place that same emphasis on functions and controls that have like timbral impact immediately, right?
So you can hear the difference immediately.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, not trying to like focus on menu-y things that are setting something up later, right? We want to give people immediate decisions, and we have a nice compromise here though, because we developed this concept not a long time ago, called the More menu, and basically there's just a little triangle button in each corner, and so if there's for all those extra brilliant ideas that everybody had as we were developing it, if it didn't go on the front panel, it gets put in there, and so the menuing in Muse is also really nice because people complain about menu diving on hardware, right? That's a gripe, right? But here there's no diving to do because all the menuing is wide, right? It's shallow. Because each menu is in its own section, right? So there's a button for the oscillator menu. If you want to mess with the oscillators and it's not on the panel, there you go. And there's no menuing to do in that way. And then this one I think came at a time when we were really thinking about like what value does like a hardware synthesizer specifically bring over software. And reiterate again, hit it with the rhetoric. It's simple hands-on control and the ability to like explore without needing to finish a track. I have this experience a lot. A lot of people who have synthesizers have this experience. I think where it's really common to sit down at your instrument and like sound design and play for an hour or two and just have fun with that. And when I come to the instrument with the desire to write a song, I've done that pre-work of finding sounds that inspire me in that other mental space.
Yeah, it's interesting that we even bring up making a track at all because I grew up in a home with a piano.
Yeah.
And I never thought about making a track when I sat down to the piano, right? Mm-hmm. But yet with the synthesizer, for some reason, it's tied to track making in a way that we have this weird emotion about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like guilt, right? Like people can feel guilty about like not finishing tracks, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the more we can do to help people not feel guilty about that and help like make a modality shift of like, what do you want to do right now? And provide options. I think that's what I hope for. And so I'm going to talk through some of the modules specifically. One of my favorites on Muse was the modulation oscillator, which is like the per voice modulation source. It's a full range VCO. So you can get some really gnarly FM stuff out of it. That's really nice. But it also just provides all of the hands-on, like most common modulations you're going to do. Like it's not bold to say people want to, modulate the filter, right? It's like the first thing you want to do. And same with, pitch and pulse width and panning and whatnot. But, being able to do that from a full range VCO and being able to track that, lets you get into all sorts of, FM stuff that is typically really challenging to do on an analog synthesizer. But kind of on the other side of that in terms of modulation, and actually let's talk about modulation as an idea really quickly too. I've heard the phrase invisible hand, right? It's something to move something else for you. I thought that was a nice metaphor. And so, that could be another oscillator, it could be an envelope, it could be your keyboard, it could be all sorts of things. It could be any kind of random voltage, right? All sorts of options. But that's how you get into these complex sounds that aren't just like, all right, it makes this sound every time I hit the key. You can get into much more complex things that change over time. And the previous section, the mod oscillator, right? That's the stuff that we know people want, right? That's your bread and butter. That's why you want it on the front panel. And for everything else, we knew we wanted this deep modulation engine. And so we put a workflow right into it, so you have buttons for those modulation sources, like your keyboard and velocity, how hard you hit the keyboard, and aftertouch, right? Like you're touched your keyboard, now you're pressing on it further. All of these things are sources of data, right? And you can press a button and then just turn any knob on the front panel, and it makes that mapping for you. And then you attenuate, decide how much of that modulation you want. And then you can apply all sorts of functions and other controllers and whatnot. And that, that kind of fills the other side of this gap of like the more advanced software type stuff, right? Like, or, the large format modular type options.
Right. The old Model 15, so on. Yep.
But, we did still want that hands-on control stuff with that deeper modulation. And so, like in the LFOs, for instance, these are your low-frequency oscillators. They move slowly. Great for evolving sounds. We included these amplitude knobs, which for something that has, like, routable modulation like this is kind of not super common because it basically acts as, like, a pre-mod matrix send level. So you could send that LFO to, 16 things. There's 16 modulation slots. You could send it to 16 things and, turn that knob up and it would be adjusting the level of all of them. So you still get that same hands-on control that you have from that modulation oscillator, just presented in a different way and with the power of that deep modular stuff. Another, I'd say, challenge in this design was separating the voice from the sequencer on Muse, and this kind of gets into the track writing, and it's something we thought a little bit, and it kind of gets into that that modality, right, where we talked with a lot of artists, notably, we had our product managers got to interview Trent Reznor for it, which was really cool, and he said, like, yeah, as you do this, just don't put a boring sequencer in it, and so we're like, all right, cool, we can do that. We found, that modality of like making sounds versus writing songs is not always like the same thing. And so by separating out writing your sequences from writing your sounds, you can write your sequence and say, is this really the sound I want? And just swap it on the fly where, most sequencers, hardware sequencers and hardware instruments, they're going to link them because it can be tedious to menu and navigate between managing two whole different objects as opposed to like, no, I hit the preset button. It loaded my song that's on that preset. But, yet again, it's like kind of limiting to that specific sphere. And it does present challenges to make it so that if you want that traditional experience, but, there's ways to do it in menuing, all sorts of options. But it was really powerful, especially because, we really went into this shallow and wide menuing, right? Not deep. Because as you look at like a note within a typical sequencer, you're going to have your note name. You might have how long the note is, the gate, right? The gate length. You might have the velocity. You might have micro timing. And on Muse in particular, it's a multi-timbral instrument. So which sound do you want to happen when it pulls the note?
There's actually quite a bit of power here,
Yeah, I mean, and when you stack all the like probabilistic stuff on this, it's really a beast of a sequencer. We have this coin toss feature that I love, where you can basically just input, a whole different set of notes for every step to say, oh, pull these notes instead on this step, which is a real fun way to do it, where you're not necessarily having to set like a musical key. You could just pull any set of notes, right? Really nice for accidentals and stuff like that.
Yeah, we'll have to get back into this conversation about the generative side of things, but yes, great.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just a little bit of showing off because nobody gets to see this stuff. Just some of the like early concept sketches. You can see kind of the panel is not super far off. You can see the dual filter cutoffs are pretty much in the same space. But we do a lot of this as part of our process, and work up in foam models and stuff like that, and a lot of prototyping. But yeah, this is that one's just for me. Yeah, and then Labyrinth. Is a design that just came out not too long ago. And this one's really purpose-driven. It's like tailoring a synthesizer to very specific kinds of sounds and interactions, not just like the traditional East Coast subtractive thing. It's really built around the idea of like taming that randomness, that probability, to create like evolving melodies and percussion parts. And that was kind of like the core idea. And, it made a lot of questions throughout our process as our team was doing, because it's like, how do these tools, affect the kind of music we make for it, right? Like in many ways, like as we were making like tracks, just like testing out our prototypes in the middle of it, like everybody was just making techno bangers like the whole time, because it's just made for it, and you pair it with a DFAM and it's so easy. But, I'm always interested in like how this hardware can help us break patterns that we like may be aware or unaware of, and that kind of randomness has been really helpful for me personally. Labyrinth is a fusion of East and West Coast synthesis. Labyrinth kind of gets to live in both of those worlds. It's kind of like sculpture to me, in that like you can build up these layers of clay, right? But you can also chisel away at marble through adding and subtracting. And let's so we'll talk about the sequencer, which is kind of the core conceit and what is maybe the most heady part of it. And so it's based on two 8-bit like shift registers, and you can think about them as sequencers for all intents and purposes. But they generate like random voltages, and you can turn them on and off, right? So you can program just a normal drum pattern in them if you'd like, but you can have them just kind of run and evolve and change within like degrees of controlled randomness. And that's kind of like the interesting thing about that corrupt knob, and that was a thing that we developed a lot during our prototyping, because we started with like a completely different behavior on that knob when we had our first prototypes. Because right now the first half of the knob, and you can see it like in the bottom leftish, first half of the knob turn on that, it will only change the notes output from the sequencer, or output when a bit changes. But the second half of it will change like the notes and turn gates on and off, right? And so that's really useful for if you have a pattern that you're locked into, but you want this melody to change. But we didn't start there. We started with like a more just fully random ability to change gates on and off. But we found it was more musical this way. Notably, hardware engineer Rick Carl and product manager at the time, Max Ravitz, worked very closely with us on that, and it was a really great collaboration. Those random voltages that get generated, as I said, they kind of get sent to a bunch of places. So they get sent to the oscillators, so you can create melodies and pitch, but they also get sent to the wave folder and the filters, so you can change your sound randomly over time. And it kind of led to some other ideas that we didn't start the design with as well. Like my favorite feature on the whole design is the buffer feature. It's just like a single piece of memory. And the whole conceit of it was basically like, all right, well, if you've got this thing that is kind of constantly changing and evolving, people like to hear things repeated, right? Like it helps ground them, right? And so the buffer basically just lets you say, all right, at a point in time, this is what I like. And then you can let it run and evolve and go somewhere else completely, but then you can bring people back, right?
Oh, like a save state?
It's a save state, yeah. Nice. It's a save state for an instrument that doesn't have save states. Yeah.
It's like
and
us.
and so it's really great for like making like little motifs, but also just A/B sections.
When we're talking about the way that the design architecture of that sequencer and like all the different changes, it does remind me of some of the modulars choices. For example, the Turing machine and mutable marbles. They also have these types of like
Lauren Mill double knot also.
Right. So I think I feel like there's an interesting interplay between, what exists, but also the history of Moog, kind of like trying to figure out where it's going to be in the future, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, this product kind of came about because I'm sure if you've spent any time online, you've seen like, oh, all Moog makes is monosynths, right? And it's true, we do make a lot of them, but we're pretty good at it. We've made a couple good ones, so I think we'll keep doing that. I'd like to do other things too, and we are doing other things, but yeah, monosynths are it's part of the legacy for sure.
Yeah. Well, big fat sound. Sometimes you don't need multiple voices, right?
Yeah. I mean, like everybody thinks they want a poly Model D until you get 4 Model D voices stacked in a mix, and then you realize you can't carve away at it.
Yeah. So I remember when you talked about adding a lot of things and then having to decide what stays and what goes. And you talked about that sort of hierarchy of what you were trying to focus on, which is timbral changes, right? Are there any really interesting ideas that wouldn't be satisfying to the initial user, but are just so cool that you wish there was a way you could actually integrate them into these face panel designs? Like things that wouldn't be so obvious and yet could be like you said, the dark corner.
That wouldn't be so obvious. I think that kind of comes into like these like more complex interactions and behaviors. Like that corrupt knob is a really good example actually, because it's like it's not a straightforward control, and it doesn't really tell you what it does on the panel. You just kind of turn it and then see what it does afterwards. Which could be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it. I'd say that's a strong example on this one that did make it on. I think the hierarchy thing is another thing worth mentioning here. Notably, like you can see big and small knobs here, right? We put emphasis on some controls that we know people are going to want to turn. So like the filter cutoff, that's the classic, you want to sweep your filter. But also notably, like this filter topology, you can sweep the filter into a bandpass. And so that's a really fun sound to go between a low pass and a bandpass. So we emphasize that. And then also on like the dark corners thing, that EG trig mix is a very clever and unanticipated timbral thing.
How does that work?
And so basically, all right, so both the sequencers are running in parallel, right? And they just output triggers, and there's just like a really dumb DJ mixer on the output of them, and to both of the envelopes. And what's really nice about having 2 sequencers like that and being able to just mix the level of the trigger output is that you basically just get velocity for free on a mix between your 2 sequences. And so you can get, these more like syncopated velocity driven things out of it.
That sounds like something that'd be easy to do in modular too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much so, right? And
didn't think about that.
These semi-modular boxes, they are very heavily inspired by Eurorack, right? We're all at Moog, everybody has a Eurorack setup of their own. We're playing all these things, and we're kind of just looking at what fun combinations of elements we would want in a box, right? What are the things that would make it a fun instrument in its own right?
Do you still feel like a boutique manufacturer in terms of how maybe you approach it from a design point of view, or even just the way that you guys say, like, you all hang out and like, enjoy doing modular synthesizers together? Is that something that kind of like keeps you in that realm of like, having that boutique mentality? Or would you say that because Moog has been around for so long and you're like very, very well known, that you can't really have that mindset?
I mean, I think that like I think as like a team
Mhm.
and like culturally, I think we're very like human focused. And so I think it's really easy for us to spend that time together, like you said.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, it does have a small team feel, right? Like we have a larger support network because of it, but our core development team is 5-6 people. It's not very many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's been, like, we mentioned it a little bit together, but there has been some changes in how the design and production has shifted since the acquisition by InMusic, right? Which happened a couple of years ago by now.
Yeah, I think it was like 2 years ago. Yep. Yeah. And so
Tell us a little bit about how that shakes down now.
Yeah. So yeah, there was some transition. The old company was purchased, and the old building was owned by our old owner. So we moved out of that building as well. The biggest change out of it really has come down to our engineering and production spaces just aren't in the same building anymore. Our production space is, maybe like 15, 20 minutes north. So I try to make it out there whenever I can. But that's the main thing that has changed about it.
What would you say is the most interesting thing about your job?
Getting to play music at work every day. Yeah.
So you just sit in a room with a bunch of synthesizers and just mess around?
I'm at a desk, yeah. There's a listening room. Yeah, I think like, everybody always has like some little like white whale of an idea they're like toying with, and they might be working on it on hardware or software or whatnot. Like, I've actually been using Labyrinth a lot recently to run like piano samples through it, through the wave folder. Really fantastic sound, specifically because of how the bias works on it, because you can emphasize even or odd harmonics. It's like really nice. It's beautiful.
All right. Well, so in your list of current obsessions beyond wave folding piano samples, is there anything else that you're currently obsessed with?
Selena.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm always trying to think of more clever ways to make things out of sheet metal. That's a big obsession for me, is like really well crafted sheet metal instruments.
Like pressed and
formed, yeah, and all the different manufacturing techniques you can use for it, because you can make them like quite elegant, in this like rather brutal material.
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't expect that. So, okay, there are obviously going to be stressful things about being a designer in synthesizers, in like a designer in a field. What would you say are like your main stress points, things that you have to like overcome in your day-to-day, or getting through a major design hurdle?
I mean, there's always disagreements, right? Like everybody has opinions. I don't think that's like particularly stressful though, right? Like everybody's very respectful, and we all have the same goal. I'd say like maybe production is the most stressful thing, because we're generally trying to like aim for a launch, right? We have a day we want to release our instruments, and as unforeseen things happen throughout the process, because they always do, production dates slip, there's unanticipated bugs, and so things push and get back. And so I'd say yeah, launches are probably the most stressful thing.
What about like user feedback and like people doing videos online about it and bashing your stuff? Do you think about that much?
I mean, I guess we think about it, but like, like you kind of have to like care about it and not care about it, right? Like, take the earnest stuff that is like constructive, and like if someone wants to just be mad online, they can be mad online. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I've found I found a lot of really great pieces of criticism and feedback from YouTubers and other people on like Mod Wiggler and other forums and whatnot.
Yeah.
We're on there, we're looking, we're reading. We want to know what people think and the problems they have, right? Because it ultimately helps us be better designers.
I mean, it's great. I mean, I'm sure we've all read some of these, or seen some of these videos about different things that we both like and dislike. And it's cool that there's actually that feedback chain that happens between the people making it and the people using it. So what would you say are your primary user base? Like who are like the main, like your core audience? Who is that?
I'm going to give you like a split answer because I think we kind of live in a couple worlds. I mean, like live performance in Moog has always really been a strong thing. You know, bass synth is really like the core thing if you're going to use a Model D, right? Like it all kind of stems from that. But you know, producers are also they're probably the biggest actual segment of like buyers these days, right? Is independent producers, band producers, large producers. Just looking for sounds that they, you know, might not get elsewhere and an experience that they might not get elsewhere.
What would you say is like the future looking forward of this hardware design thing? We can talk a little bit more later about why we use different things, but you're coming at it from the point of view of a designer of hardware instruments primarily. What are you seeing happening?
You know, we've seen a long wave of nostalgia. I think, you know, plenty of reissues. We've done them too. You know, certainly there's a lot more contemporary designs that are just like, hey, we're just making a new thing. I think I'm excited personally to see more instrument designs that are genre focused and driven, right? Like things that are specifically made for a style of music, and because you'll make different decisions, right? Because in a DAW, in a general subtractive synth, it's going to be made to be multi-purpose, right? You want to be able to, you know, work for the R&B players and the prog players and the producers, the film scorers. You know, it's such a broad audience that you have to include a really broad feature set. But those tools exist, I guess, is my point, right? And so I think more niche-driven things are going to be more prevalent.
Cool.
Super cool conversation. I'm so glad that I was able to be a part of bringing this to you guys. If you want to support the channel, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.